Hi everyone, Ainsley here from Small Fry Creations, and this week I'm going to show you how you can build some floating shelves with some magnet snap-on frames. Let me show you how I did it.
Let me start by saying I went into this project thinking it would be quite straightforward. However, towards the end I ran into some challenges which I will run through when we get there. As this project measurements are specific to my needs, I won't bore you with them. The material I'm using for this project is 18mm birch plywood. As I'm using leftover plywood from the Lego box build, I needed to sort through the plywood and work out how many shelves I could get from each piece. Once I had sorted through the plywood, I could start breaking down the pieces, cutting them to width on the table saw and to length on the miter saw. Each shelf needed a top and front. Now I didn't want any of the plywood edges visible in the shelf as I would use this as a design feature in the frames, so I used 45-degree miters to connect the top to the front. I didn't reinforce this joint because I wanted the plywood to flow from the top to the front. Given I'm using plywood which is stable and the front of the shelf will not really carry any weight, I think it'll be okay. If down the road the joint starts to split, I'll just have to fix it. I made my way through all the pieces, cutting the 45 degrees on the mating edges. When it came to gluing each shelf up, I used the trusty blue tape method. While the shelves were drying, I could start on the shelf supports. These were very simple, just strips of plywood 20mm wide and cut to the lengths I needed. It was then time to install the supports into the room. When we built the house 5 years ago, we noticed on the plan that it was just going to be empty space and the wall would continue to the door. Instead of it being wasted space, we asked the builders to frame it out and add it to the rooms. Given our Lego obsession is getting out of hand with limited space to put the Lego, this space is becoming very valuable. To attach the supports to the walls, I went with these wall grab screws. They are designed to be able to screw straight into the plaster without anything else. I have never used them before and wanted to give them a go. These would be an alternative to using wall mates. Overall, I would rate them okay. Some of the screws held better than others. If I was to repeat the project, I would use wall mates. I cut a spacer piece to make putting the supports into place easier. These shelves will be used to store Lego buildings, so the space between the shelves is the common height of most Lego buildings. I made sure to pre-drill all my holes so I didn't have any wood splitting. With the supports in place, I could turn my attention to the first challenge, creating a bulkhead at the top of the space. I used cardboard to template around the cornice, and when I had a good fit with the cardboard, I used it as a template to trace onto the plywood and used a jigsaw to cut the shape out. I could then glue this piece onto a piece of plywood that would become the bottom of the bulkhead. I sanded all the pieces and got them ready for paint. Each piece got a coat of undercoat with 2 top coats of paint. The paint colour I'm using is the same as the walls in the house, as I wanted the shelves to feel like they were always part of the room and built in. At the same time, I painted the supports the same colour. I slid the bulkhead into place and screwed the supports in underneath. Like all plaster, at times the walls are not completely square, so to cover up any gaps I used paintable caulk. This also added to the built-in look. When applying the caulk, I ran a bead along the gap and used my finger to scrape off the excess. I made sure to have a damp rag close by so I could clean after each swipe. You can also get a tool from the hardware store instead of using your fingers.
The the shelves are in place, and you could, if you wanted to, call this project done at this point, but I'm going to take it one step further. I want to build some frames because on my shelves I'm going to have Lego. I don't want them to get dusty, and I'm going to attach the frames to the front of the shelf via magnets, and that way the dust is contained and not going to get on the Lego. I'm going to use the leftover plywood that I've got from the shelves to make it, and then I'm going to put some perspex at the front so you can see through. So let's get over to the table saw and start to get these pieces cut.
When it comes to the frames, these are very simple and start with cutting strips of plywood that are 18mm wide, so I end up with 18mm square strips. I use the miter saw to cut the 45-degree angles and the stop block to ensure the top matched the bottoms and the sides were the same length. Before gluing up the frame, I cut a 3mm slot in the middle of each piece to accept the perspex. I also cut the perspex down to size. The beauty of working with perspex is you can use any woodworking tool to cut it. When running the perspex through the saw, I keep a nice steady pace, as going too fast will cause chip out and going too slow will cause the perspex to heat up and start to melt. I used blue tape to glue each frame up and pulled away some of the protective coating on the perspex so I could insert it into the frame.
My frames are out of glue up, and my next step is I need to reinforce these miters. So to do that, I'm going to use a spline jig that I made recently, and I'll leave a link in the description below for one that I followed along with. Really simple. What I need to do is grab my frame and pop it in the jig like so, and then I need to raise up my blade far enough so it comes through the joint but not all the way through, and then we'll cut some material to act as splines, get those all glued in, apply some magnets to the top and the bottom, and then we can wrap this project up.
This jig I think will be handy to have in the workshop and will be put to use in future projects. I made cuts all the way around the frame and then flipped the frame over and made my way around again. This left me with 6mm wide gaps for the splines. I used plywood as spines as I like the contrast of the plywood edge against the birch plywood. With the splines drying, I could then drill and glue the magnets into place. The magnets I am using are 10mm by 2mm, and I attach 3 to the top and 3 to the bottom of each frame. Another challenge I faced in this project was with the strength of the magnets and them holding onto the shelves, so at the end of the project I ended up adding more magnets, totaling 6 on the top and 6 on the bottom. I used Gorilla Super Glue to glue the magnets into place. At this stage, the splines were dry and I used a flush trim saw to cut them flush. I could then remove the rest of the protective coating and apply a couple of coats of clear to the frames. The biggest challenge on this project was finding a material I liked and that worked for the magnet frames to stick to. I originally wanted to use a magnet strip, however this was not strong enough and the frames would just fall down. My next thought was aluminium bar, however magnets do not stick to aluminium. My last solution was a steel bar, however I didn't want it to be too thick and the only bar I could find was this. I don't love the holes, but it's only 3mm thick, which works perfectly, so I went with this. I used the Dremel to cut them to length. My next plan was to screw them into place, however the screw stuck out too far and so the magnets wouldn't hold, and I couldn't countersink the screws as the metal was only 3mm thick. To fix this, I ended up using Gorilla Super Glue and I glued the strips into place, which worked no problems. To make the strips not stand out as much, I painted them the same colour as the shelves using metal paint primer as the first coat. It was finally time to bring these shelves to life and add the Lego and see the finished product. Although I faced a number of challenges in this project, I'm happy with the finished product. The frames work perfectly and have a strong hold. The shelves look like they were always meant to be there, so all the goals of this project were met. I do hope you have enjoyed this project, and if you have, help me out by hitting those subscribe and like buttons, and also let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one.